Hey, so I I ended up getting a hotel here in Vilnius, really close to the train station. It's like, and I could totally see how this was like a Soviet era hotel. And I think one of the things about those old hotels is like they're always being renovated and fixed because they're always like falling apart. This this one's no exception. So like, I mean, of course it's being constructed on. People are nice. The staff here are lovely at the lovely Panorama Hotel here in downtown Vilnius, and the room's great. It's got great views. And but I mean, it's a small. I'll just do a little turnaround. This was like $50, $50 walking in the door yesterday, just right around. It may have been a little bit more, but it's a tiny room. You can see I got like these two little beds that push together and make kind of a queen bed, but it's no frills. I've got the little TV mounted up there. There's a tiny bathroom in here. I don't think you're that interested in seeing that. But anyway, so the Panorama Hotel is very centrally located. The train station and the bus station are right across the park here. So it's a great place. Initially, I had thought I would come into Vilnius and then the same day I got here, take a train or leave and go up towards Panemunis. So Panemunis is the village on the right up by the Latvian border where my great grandfather and his family were from back before he came to the United States, and like I think it was like around the turn of the century, the early 1900s, late 1890s, when they left, when he left from there. So, but just like to recap, so yesterday I went to see the icon. There's a very famous icon of the Virgin Mary that is tied to a story of like miracles that have happened. So it goes back to when the Swedish army invaded Vilnius hundreds of years ago, and during the siege, and ultimately the city was destroyed by the Swedes more or less, and that the wall that you still see a portion of when you go to the gate, that wall was basically entirely destroyed. There's only a small section of it that survived that invasion and that conquest by the Swedes. But there's a story of how the city, there was nobody left to defend the city. And so as the Swedish soldiers were either coming in or something, the city gate dropped shut, which I guess is technically like an impossibility. It did, the gates of the city closed of their own accord on top of the invading Swedish army killing several of them, and it was thought to be a miracle. So it's a very brutal miracle, but I think it gives you some idea of how of that whole, you know, like of that. So she's a protector of the Lady of the Gate of Dawn is a protector of travelers and of the city of Vilnius. So it's very interesting to me also in Catholic, because I was raised Catholic, but not particularly devoutly, and I don't have a lot of like I know a great deal about Catholicism, but I've never really practiced it amongst a community of people who practice Catholicism. Maybe as a kid I did growing up, I'd go to church and stuff, but I don't think this is the video where we're going to get too into it. But anyway, with regards to the lady, I've also done a pilgrimage. I did the Camino Santiago in Portugal, which is the way of St. James in Portugal. And the difference between this route and that route is that way of St. James was an actual route that the Apostle St. James is said to have walked and traveled on. You know, he would travel from the Middle East to Portugal, the western coast of Iberia, and he traveled up and down in that area because, I mean, there were Roman cities then. It was developed somewhat. And there's the story of how St. James's body was brought by a ship that had no crew from where he was martyred in Palestine all the way to Spain, and the boat with no sailors moored itself in the harbor in Padrón, And then I'm still not even that clear about the body, but there are pictures of the rock where the boat was tied to. I mean, not a picture. There's that actual stone that the boat was tied to is maintained in a church there as an object of veneration and as a place of pilgrimage in Padron. Totally different stories, and I think it gets into like that's where pilgrimage gets much more into this history of people, European people traveling to see these curiosities or things that led to faith or something. Anyway, but it's just to jump back to that. So I did this side trip. I was doing the Camino Santiago to Santiago to Santiago Compostela in Spain. But along the way, I did a side trip where I went to visit Fatima, and so that is another. So in the Catholic tradition, when there's something that is like spiritually very powerful or an object of veneration, because of the strictures of the church and that you can only really pray to God, His Son, and the Holy Spirit. Those are the only sort of spiritual avenues of veneration that will lead you to your spiritual salvation, which I've deviated from substantially at this point in my life, and I don't know that I was ever too entirely keen on, because I've always been fascinated by like a much more rich pantheon of deities, a world inhabited by elves and dwarves and gnomes and sprites and things. Like that's much more where I'd like to live in that magical world. So anyway, but it's interesting, Catholicism, when there is something that has happened that becomes an object of faith, if it doesn't quite fit in that paternalistic kind of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, it becomes associated with the Virgin Mary somehow. So Fatima, where there was children who were experiencing an apparition of a woman, and there's no account indicating that apparition ever identified herself as the Virgin Mary. I'm not sure that she did. I have a hard time buying that portion of it, but it seems to be some like spiritual or like some like alien or something that is communicating with children that gets tied into the Virgin Mary. Now, what happens here in Vilnius, a city gate miraculously falling and murdering 4 invading soldiers, is thought of as a miracle. That also gets associated with the Virgin Mary. I'd suggest to you that like when you're dealing with like a spiritual entity, the Mary in her aspect of like the mother of God, is not the same Mary who's dropping the portcullis down on the soldiers. So, and there is something about the Black Madonna, and at different, I remember discussing this with somebody before. This is a really long time ago, like years ago. And we were talking about, we were just sort of discussing whether that could have some like correlation to the like Shakti in like a Vedic tradition, the idea or the notion of a Shakti, who is associated like it's a female spiritual entity or spiritual power that bestows power and strength on people, like has a tremendous amount of energy, but it's a female principle as opposed to a male principle. And so somebody had mentioned this to me before. And so there are a number of icons or pictures there, and they're associated with images of the Virgin Mary where her skin or her face is dark. And I say dark, people say black, but that too frequently gets this idea. Like, I don't want you to believe that it's like a completely Africanized image of her, but it's just a very dark, the painting or whatever it is. And I don't know if it was a function of the painting technique in this medieval period where that, like a face would slowly darken and become this sort of black Madonna. So I've been attending to the shrines of some of the images of the Blessed Virgin Mary as they occur across Europe. And I wanted to point out that within Catholicism, I would say many Catholics who are interested in this kind of stuff would agree that the Virgin Mary has a cult that encompasses many different aspects of divinity, of spiritual power, and that, yeah. So anyway, so like my side visit to Fatima over here, and you can see this is a very different image than the image here. This is the Lady Fatima. It's a very different image than the one, than the Virgin Mary who drops the portcullis down and crushes soldiers because they're threatening Vilnius, But yeah, so that I went there today. So we're doing we're gonna keep going from here. We've paid our respects to the Lady of the Gate of Dawn. And so I went to the chapel there, and when I got to the chapel, just as I arrived there, they were singing. They had I guess I got there right in time for Mass. And it's a tiny chapel, and maybe 20 people could stand in it. And there are people lined up going out the door. And they're singing in Lithuanian as I walked in. And so I left there, and at the front, and I just happened to do this. I walked to the front of the church and went in, and down beneath the steps, I was able to pick out what the words meant on the sign there. And it was the Lithuanian version of the word peregrino, which means pilgrim. In peregrino, I think, is Portuguese or Spanish for pilgrim. But I could read, it's in Lithuanian, and it's not exactly spelled the same or anything, but I sort of riddled that out in my mind, and I went to that door, and there happened to be somebody there working in there. It was a very lovely gentleman who gave me a new credential. So this is the Lithuanian credential. And just to remind folks, if you're watching this and you don't know this, what you do is, if you're doing a religious pilgrimage, you'll carry something like this, a credential, and you'll get stamps. You obviously fill it out, so it's individualized to you, and you have people stamp it. And so the date that's written under each of those stamps sort of legitimizes the fact that you're on this continuous foot journey, or like a bicycle journey, or even by car. You're taking a journey, and you're doing a pilgrimage systemically, and you're not just sort of taking advantage of some of the kindness and like the charity that you find when you're doing this. It's interesting because when I hiked on the Appalachian Trail, they were trying out a passport system similar to this, and I don't know how that's really caught on, and I don't think it really has. The difference with the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail versus the Camino is substantial, because on the Camino, it's pretty much every day you're staying in a town. So having some way to verify that you actually are doing a pilgrimage and you're not just sort of trying to live on the cheap. If you're going to live on the cheap, you've got to actually be doing some miles every day. That's how it works around here. So I got the new credential. So this was really significant because on the back of this is a different map of all of the Camino routes. So right now, I'm over here in Vilnius on this side of the country. So online, all of this red and green and yellow, those routes, those lines, I didn't see any of that online on the internet. So when I was planning this out, I was going to take that blue route down the middle of the country from top to bottom. But now that there is like a route and that there are other of these pilgrimage routes, I think I'm going to branch off from that. So initially my plan had been to come here, go to the chapel of the Gate of Dawn, go to the Gates of Dawn, and then take another travel up to Panemunis on the Latvian border where my great-grandfather is from. And then from there, go to the other pilgrimage route and go from Latvia south to Poland and do that route. But now I can just walk from Vilnius. So I think, tomorrow morning, I'm gonna set out from here and go north, and sort of walk the route up towards, and I'd say I've got about 100 miles. It's not like a short hike. It's about 100 miles from here to the border. maybe more. I think it's probably, it's probably about 100, 120. Hike up there, go visit this village if I can. We'll see how that goes. And then just sort of play it by ear. I don't think I'm going to do a border to border walk, but I very well may hike up there and then do like other sections, or just find a different section over here with whatever time I have left until I fly back. So getting the credential, getting this and seeing that map absolutely has changed sort of the trajectory of all this. And I think that that's an important thing. You can over plan these kinds of things. And maybe it's the experience of doing this a few times, like having these kinds of, like, trying to do one of these long hikes, just sort of easing into it. Flexibility is a good thing, and it's also like, you've got to be willing to change. You have to see what it is that you really want to do, But so tomorrow I'm going to be leaving out of Vilnius. I'm going to be hiking north, and I expect there to be a lot of I'm going to be hiking through national parkland. So it should be lovely. It should be pretty. There's a lot of lakes in this area too, so it should be very interesting. But one of the things I'm kind of unsure about is, so online presently, if you go look at like the Camino Lituano and the hiking route for the pilgrimage route in Lithuania, it shows two routes that are in the western part of the country, but not these routes around Vilnius. And so what I've wondered about is the degree to which that's sort of obscured right now, because there's a tremendous amount of trouble with illegal immigration from Belarus. And so I'm much closer to Belarus now, like in the eastern part of the country. And so these Camino routes are all in the eastern part of the country, but they're not available online right now, if you know what I mean. So, also, I've had the interesting experience of looking at some of the online, like, virtual maps, trying to plan out these routes. And I try to hover in on these little towns. I can't see anything there. So I remember there was something also when the tensions between the Russians and Lithuania got ratcheted up over the last few months, and they have gotten really ratcheted up, that there was something about how, like, the GPS, like if you went and looked at GPS maps for Lithuania, they had all like changed. And I'm not sure if that was I'm assuming that that's from the EU side, not having as much information about the country available. Yeah. Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn is always looking out for folks. She's the one she's the one hacking your phone. So I've been having problems with my phone too since I got over here, and I don't know if it's hackers. It's a hacker. You have virus. You have virus. Very bad virus. You must get virus taken care of. I tell you. And I don't think it's virus. I don't think it's hacker. Maybe it's hacker, but it could be virus. I don't know. So anyway, so tomorrow I'm gonna head out and start walking out. Is there anything else really to report? I think that's it in a nutshell for the first day of this.